Here's the famous hammer beam truss, or hammer beam truss for many, the pinnacle of English Gothic carpentry. Perhaps the most famous example is Westminster Hall, which was built in 1400, more than 600 years ago. I'm going to show you a picture and look at how beautiful it is. How does the structure allow for such an open space without columns interfering on the floor? I'll give you the name of the carpenter who led that construction to honor him. The hammer beam truss is actually a false truss, since it lacks one of its most important components, which is the tie beam that should go here. This one, if you notice, is an interrupted tie beam. The roof loads, then, cannot be resolved here in the tie beam, which would be working in tension if it were complete. That's why the geometry of this structure is so challenging, because the roof loads are resolved here in the walls, which creates an extreme outward thrust. In the Middle Ages, that was solved in a very simple and direct way, which was to have very heavy, very thick, very solid walls. This way, they didn't have to worry about the posts opening or being pushed out. Notice in the example of Westminster how high the ceiling ends. The higher the ceiling, or where the ceiling ends, the greater the lateral forces. They could afford that because they had tremendous stone walls below that resisted that lateral force. If we want to mitigate that lateral force a bit, what we can do is bring these last diagonals closer to the ground or closer to the base of these posts. That way, the load is a little more vertical and not so lateral. Just like in an arch, this structure works mainly in compression, transmitting the roof loads through these diagonals. Do you see? Here you can kind of notice the arch shape that this roof has on the inside. The legs, the rafters, or the cords end here in these beams, which are called hammer beams, and they need to have a joint, just like we saw with the Spanish truss, so that the legs don't spread apart. You can imagine that if this hammer beam were complete, going all the way across to the other side, spanning the entire width of the roof, it would become a tie beam. We wouldn't have to think so hard about these diagonals and structures. It would just be a more conventional truss, with this piece working in tension. In this case, what this beam does is transfer or transmit the loads coming from above to this last diagonal. The intermediate posts usually have a through mortise and tenon joint with a wedge, and there are different variations of this joint. Sometimes the hammer beam is the one that goes through the intermediate post piece, and sometimes the intermediate post goes through the hammer beam. I have seen both versions. And at the top, we have here a false king post, very similar to the king post in the Spanish truss. But in this case, this piece touches this horizontal. Could we then say that this piece is no longer a king post since it is touching a horizontal? It's more like a post or a strut, since it is transmitting the force to this piece. The one that doesn't get bent very much, since automatically, with these diagonal supports, the force continues moving along here, towards the intermediate posts, and then beyond the intermediate posts. We reach the hammer beams, and the hammer beams come down here through this last diagonal, exerting a very considerable outward thrust. Advantages and disadvantages of this type of construction. On one hand, and in my opinion, it's one of the most spectacular and striking structures in traditional carpentry. It allows for unsurpassed spaciousness and also has a colossal cathedral-like appearance. But at the same time, it looks light since it has all this open space. The disadvantages might be a little heavier than the advantages. A very high technical level is required to make the joints. I mean, it really takes skilled labor. Seriously. Expert and highly trained, but above all, you need advanced knowledge in load calculation. I wouldn't dare build my house with this type of roof, for example, only after consulting a structural engineer to help define the geometry, joint types, thickness, or wood type. The lateral force that walls receive is likely the most critical and concerning factor when deciding whether to use this type of structure, which at least for me makes me reflect and admire the medieval carpenters who had a unique skill and talent to be able to build such impressive structures, and that are still standing to this day after more than 600 years. I'm very happy to have been able to show you this example of traditional carpentry. It's one of my favorites. I'd love to build my house this way, but as I mentioned, It's not just about starting, it's much harder and needs a lot more calculation and thought. Please let me know if you find this series of structures interesting or entertaining, so I can make more similar videos for you. If you have suggestions for future videos like this, let me know. Lastly, I want to mention that this video's sponsor is myself with my joinery course, which is really comprehensive. I don't want to bore you, but I'll leave the link down in the description for anyone interested in learning how to make wooden joints, just like the ones you see here. Everyone you see in this structure is included in my course, so I'll leave that for you in the description. Sending hugs, take care, and see you soon in the next video. Bye.